Back at you, Dr. A, Chapter 10, Unit 6, the nervous system. So some of the goals of this chapter is for you guys to understand and be able to name and locate a lot of the different major organs of the nervous system and understand their functions. We are also, via the audio file lecture in this unit, you should be able to learn the combining forms, the prefixes, the suffixes, of the various medical terms of the nervous system, and also looking at some of the medical conditions associated with the nervous system is an equally important part of this chapter. So let's start with the nervous system and understanding just a basic introduction of what it is. We're talking about 10 billion nerve cells, and some of them are voluntary, some of them are involuntary. So some have voluntary functions or involuntary functions, which simply means that the voluntary functions is anything that is under your conscious control, where involuntary is not in your conscious control, and it carries the electrical messages to and from the brain, and we have a lot of the external and internal receptors that are able to recognize the various messages. The nerve cells, better known as a neuron, which is the nerve cell of the nervous system, is microscopic, and it carries a lot of the electrical messages all over the body. The two major divisions of the nervous system is the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, better known as the CNS and the PNS. The CNS, or the central nervous system, is the brain and the spinal cord. The PNS, or the peripheral nervous system, is the cranial nerves, the spinal nerves, all the peripheral nerves of the body. Now, the cranial and the spinal nerves, the sensory nerves, they carry the messages towards the brain, while the motor nerves carry the messages from the brain. So make sure we understand that. And obviously we have mixed nerves that carry both sensory and motor. So when we say sensory, we're talking about our senses, and when we say motor, we're talking about all the different motor functions like skeletal muscle contractions and things like that. Okay. Then we take another subdivision called the autonomic nervous system, which carries all the impulses from the CNS to the organs. We break that down into sympathetic and parasympathetic. Now, the sympathetic nervous system is the nerve stimulating part of the nervous system, so that's your body's response to stress. We call it the fight or flight response. And you have the parasympathetic, which the nerves balance the sympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate slows down, you're more at ease or calm, and it lowers your blood pressure. So that's a subdivision of the autonomic nervous system. Make sure that you know the divisions of the nervous system and the breakdown of the CNS and the PNS, further broken down into the ANS, or the autonomic nervous system. Now, understanding the neuron is very, very important, because the neuron is the nerve cell of the nervous system. It has a dendrite, it has a nucleus, it has an axon, which contains the myelin sheath, and the neurolemma, which is the covering around, the protective covering around the axon. And we also have something called the ganglia, and the ganglia are the small clusters of nerve cell bodies. So in this unit, or in this chapter, chapter 10, the nervous system, there are images where it's, you should be able to label the parts of the neuron and review the path of the actual nerve impulse. So glial cells is one of the supporting cells of the neuron. It maintains the health of the nervous system. It does not transmit impulses, but it is a supporting cell. Other cell types, like astrocytes, they're called astrocytes because they're star shapes. We have microglial cells, we have oligodendroglia, and ependymal cells. Now, when you look at the brain and understand the cerebrum, and the different hemispheres and lobes of the brain, is very, very important to know the functions of the different parts of the brain. So like, if you look at the frontal lobe, a lot of your personality, emotion, behavior, thought process takes place in that area. You also have the temporal for hearing, speech, and understanding. Parietal, visual and spatial perception area. Occipital is your visual field, or your visual area. Looking at the cerebral cortex and the different lobes is very important to know the lobes as well as the function of each lobe. So we know that the cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. It's called the cerebral cortex, which manages a lot of your speech, your vision, your smell, your movement, your hearing, and your thought. You have the cerebellum, which coordinates a lot of the voluntary movement. It maintains the balance. We also have the thalamus, which integrates and monitors a lot of the impulses from the skin, like pain. You also have the hypothalamus, which controls body temperature, sleep, appetite, desire, and emotion. The hypothalamus also releases a lot of the hormones of the pituitary gland, so the release of the hormones from the pituitary gland is under the control of the hypothalamus. It monitors a lot of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. You also have the brainstem, the pons, which bridges the cerebrum and the cerebellum with the rest of the brain, and it's a house of nerves for the face and the eyes. And then we have the medulla oblongata, which connects the spinal cord to the brain, and obviously it regulates your blood vessels, your heart, and your respiratory movements. The spinal cord, the meninges, these are all a part of my nervous system, and the peripheral and central nervous system. Looking at some of the conditions associated with the nervous system. Now remember, before we go into the conditions, remember to go into your audio files for the nervous system to listen to a lot of the terms associated with the nervous system, like the prefixes, the suffixes, the combining forms. There are plenty of terms. Some of the medical conditions of the nervous system: Alzheimer's, ALS, epilepsy, MS or multiple sclerosis, myasthenia gravis, Parkinson's disease, other infectious disorders like herpes zoster affects the nervous system, meningitis, and HIV. Some of the traumatic disorders, concussions or cerebral concussion. There's a temporary brain dysfunction after an injury. There may be no evidence of any type of injury, but it's very important to allow the brain to heal, especially within the 24 hours, the first 24 hours. You also have cerebral contusion. A contusion is a bruising of the brain. It's usually associated with a skull fracture, and that usually has to do with some trauma, or it's trauma related. CVAs, or cerebral vascular accidents, we better know them. Know them as strokes. They could be thrombotic, embolic, or hemorrhagic. And a thrombotic stroke is a blood clot in the artery leaving the brain. An embolic stroke is a dislodged clot that travels to the arteries of the brain. And a hemorrhagic stroke is just a blood vessel, such as an artery that breaks and it leaks, and a lot of bleeding occurs. Now, these are equally dangerous, and there are plenty of ways to minimize your risk of CVA, like maintaining your blood pressure. Migraines, it's a severe, recurring, usually unilateral vascular headache, and those are usually treated with various drugs.